Well, I don't know how it affected you, but it affected me like a bolt out of the blue. It was the last thing I was expecting when news was leaked that the Supreme Court had apparently considered and has decided to overturn Roe v. Wade, the extremely controversial, extremely badly written legal opinion back in 1973 that legalized abortion throughout America. The news, as of course everybody knows by now, was not issued by the Supreme Court. It was issued by a leak. Somebody on the inside decided that this was so important that they had to essentially shatter rules that had been in place since the beginning of the Republic in order to physically intimidate the justices, which we'll get to in just a second. This leak is of catastrophic proportions, and not because of the particular case that it's dealing with. It was leaked because this is the third rail of left-wing politics. That's why it was leaked. But the fact that it was leaked is a catastrophe. And if you haven't really figured out why, let me just make that clear for you. The reason that the Supreme Court is able to function is because when they make an announcement of their ruling, it is a fait accompli. It's already happened. It's in the past. There's nothing you can do about it. The Supreme Court has decided, here it is. You don't have to like it. Many people don't, but there's nothing you can do about it. It has been issued. For this leak to come out applies political, physical pressure, and you can just ask Brett Kavanaugh and a couple of other conservative justices about this, in an attempt to influence the court. And this is what the left does. This is what the left does. They're monsters, and they're not just monsters because they don't play by the rules, although let's take a look at some of the rules they don't play by. In the case of the Supreme Court, what have we seen? Well, when we had finally gotten a conservative majority on the court, then it was time to pack the court. In other words, if through fair and legal means, the 9-person Supreme Court, which is not specified in the Constitution, by the way, it's kind of a shock to me to know that the only thing required of the Supreme Court in the Constitution is that there be a Chief Justice. The number of justices has never been specified in the Constitution, and it was always a threat of the president, the executive office, to say to the judicial branch, well, we don't like your rulings, I'll just appoint more people who think like I do. Now, that hasn't happened in a very, very long time. And the reason we've had 9 justices for a long time is because civilized people agree to play by the rules. That's why we have rules. That's what civilization is. Civilization is a set of rules that we all agree to play by. A democracy is even more precarious than civilization. You can impose rules on people through a dictatorship or a theocracy or any kind of a monarchy or anything like that. But a democracy, not only do you have to live by rules, but you have to agree to live by rules that you may have been supporting and then lost in an election. You have to agree to that. You have to agree to govern yourself in a way that you don't want to and that you tried very hard to avoid, but nevertheless, that's how the system works. And the alternative to this is lawlessness and anarchy. And lawlessness and anarchy is the absolute essence of the modern left. And it's not just the Supreme Court. So if they have a decision that the Supreme Court issues that they don't like, then what do? Well, we'll see if we can pack the courts. If it's already too late, then it's time to start smashing windows, burning down pro-life centers, and most importantly, going directly where the justices live and making sure that that threat of physical intimidation is on them. That means that they're no longer justices. The Supreme Court is no longer the Supreme Court. It's now just another gang of SA street toughs, just the brown shirts again, smashing windows and intimidating people into agreeing with them. It's just plain thuggery. And this is what they're made of. And it's not just the Supreme Court. I decided to take a look at some institutions in American life and just kind of go down the list and see what the Democrats and the left have done to American institutions. Let's start with cities, why don't we? You know, cities used to be the pride of America. New York City, Detroit, Motown, motor capital of the world, Los Angeles, entertainment capital of the world, all of these cities. In the case of Detroit and Los Angeles, New Orleans, Atlanta, Chicago, Democrats have been running these cities by themselves without any Republicans for over half a century, in some cases more than a century. What has happened to these cities? Well, in the 1940s and 50s, these were bustling metropolitan areas. Everybody was working and everybody had a job. And more importantly, black and white people were living next to each other, literally next door to each other in Baltimore and places like that. And they were getting along, because there was law and order there, because there was civilization there, because there were rules in place there, you see. But after half a century of being in charge of America's cities, we don't have cities anymore. We have murder pits where the murder rate is, 30 times the national average. In a video I did called Number One with a Bullet, I said if you take the murder rate of the United States, right now it's about halfway down the list of countries. When I did the video a couple years ago, we were 111 out of, I think, 211 listed countries with a per capita murder rate. But if you take the cities out, if you take the democratically controlled areas out, and you go with a place like Plano, Texas, where everyone's armed to the teeth, then America's murder rate is lower than Switzerland, it's lower than Belgium, it's lower than France, it's lower than all of those people. This is a civilized country when we agree to play by the rules, but the left will destroy the rules if the rules aren't working for them. So let's go down the list in no particular order. Take the Boy Scouts. How do you screw up the Boy Scouts? How do you screw up something that simple, that wholesome, that decent, that pure? How do you screw that up? And you bring all of this gender issues, all of this political issues, and all of these grooming issues into the Boy Scouts, and you corrupt the Boy Scouts until there's nothing left of the Boy Scouts. And when that empty husk is left, then you withdraw your attention from it. That's what you do if you're the left. You identify a target, you destroy it, and then you move on. What else have we got? Well, we've got men's sports. Men's sports were largely ruined by Title IX. Title IX was the left-wing legislation that said that female sports had to have basically equivalent facilities and so on as male sports. Now, in principle, that's a fine thing. I have no problem with that whatsoever, and women's athletics may have been underserved. But what the left does with these kind of things, the way they destroy things is they simply manipulate the rules in order to achieve a political end. And in the case of Title IX, what you end up with is you end up with universities that have a high demand for male sports, but they can't spend money on it because that becomes an imbalance, and then they have to spend the money that they need to spend on popular male sports on unpopular female sports, in some cases where there aren't even any females enlisted. I'm using the word females even though I'm not a biologist. And so I recall a case from several years ago where alumni had to get together and buy seats for a stadium because Title IX said that they couldn't spend the money on the stadium because it was primarily a male sport, football sport, something like that. This is how you screw up everything. You just politicize it and destroy it, and you move on. What about women's sports? Nah, nothing they've done to women's athletics could possibly ruin that, right? After an entire 2 generations of hearing about how girls can compete, how girls can kick ass, how girl power, we have achieved a world where women's athletics is vibrant and was vibrant and interesting, and now it's destroyed because men are competing as women. You don't even have to have a sex change operation. You just have to have your testosterone level below a certain threshold, which is convenient because when you get in the cases of college swimmers, let's say, it doesn't matter what his or her testosterone levels are. What matters is that individual who is a transgender athlete had testosterone in his system before he became a she. And that meant that they got the shoulders of a man, and they've got the hips of a man, and they have the mechanical leverage of the male body, which means that transgender swimmers come in ahead of the nearest female competitors by about 20 or 30 seconds. Not tenths of a second, not 3 seconds, 30 seconds earlier. There are no more female athletics. If the left continues with this, it's just going to be nothing but transgendered males. That's going to be what the Olympics are going to be. The Olympics is going to consist of men's category, and the female category will be won by transgender males. This is the inevitable outcome of their philosophy. Okay, well, that's just fluff and entertainment. What about the serious stuff? What about the police and the military? Well, the left, these monsters that believe in nothing but their own power, nothing but their own immediate gratification, don't care anything about the ruins, don't care anything about the murders, don't care anything about the fires, don't care anything about the businesses destroyed. They don't care about anything other than their own selves and what they want to do in their own political power. We've seen the left go with the defund the police movement that have destroyed more lives, and especially more inner city lives, which means more black lives. More black people have suffered because of defund the police movement and Black Lives Matter movement. Those movements primarily affect black Americans, and they affect them in an extremely negative way. The people who are calling for defunding the police, by the way, those people are no longer calling for defunding the police. Now those people are saying, let's refund the police, especially where I live, because now it's starting to affect me, you see. But they don't care if the murder rate goes up in areas where they've called for the defund of the police. What are a few thousand lives compared to the virtue signaling that is the lifeblood of the progressive left? It's not a question of priorities. They cannot survive without this virtue signaling, without showing everybody how smart they are and how good they are. And same thing with the military. You know, we've invested trillions and trillions of dollars to produce the most astonishing, capable, lethal, disciplined, controlled force of good in the history of the world. And all of that is being sent to the bottom of the ocean by woke ideology, by dependence on political and social issues when the military's job is to go out and kill people. And this is the one thing that actually genuinely scares me, is how badly the military has been eroded. This has been going on for a while. Several years ago, I met a guy who was in command of a Green Beret company or regiment. I actually don't remember. But he left the military because he was told that instead of training his men on how to survive and how to defend America, he had to go through the barracks and make sure there were no girly magazines there, because God knows you can't have our special forces warriors having girly magazines in their tents or whatever the case may be, because, you know, that could be offensive to some people. He had to make sure there were no offensive tattoos that might upset women or transgender people in the military. He couldn't train his men, and that meant his men were going to die, and that meant he wanted nothing to do with it, so he's out of there. He's replaced by somebody who will do those things. And it doesn't matter how powerful the sword is. If the sword arm is anemic, weak, and atrophied, then the sword doesn't matter. And that's not an accident. Remember a few minutes ago I was talking about how in a democracy we not only have to abide by rules like any other civilization, we also have to abide by the rules that we make for ourselves. And when we lose, we have to agree to do things we don't want to do because that's what the civilization requires. Well, that is predicated on elections. The reason that this contract between a government and a people works is because we, the people, say, all right, here's the deal. We will do what you tell us to do, but two conditions. Number one, we decide who you are. We get to say who is going to be doing the lawmaking. And number two, once you get into that office, you have to play by the same rules as everybody else. You pass a law for me, that law also applies to you. Let's ask Hillary Clinton how that works. Let's ask Hunter Biden or Joe Biden or any of these other people who have become multi-millionaires through politics. Let's talk about the fact that there is no longer an election day in America. It's not even election season anymore. I have no doubt whatsoever, living in California, that I could already cast my vote in the 2022 election. I have no doubt whatsoever. In fact, it gives me time to cast as many votes as I would want. Dinesh D'Souza's recent documentary is one of many, 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 many cases of absolutely fraudulent activities and fraudulent practices. The reason we have an election day is so that you can't be in two places at once. It's not so hard to figure out. And I saw a video put out by, I don't know who it was. It was a young conservative group, might have been Young Americans for Freedom. I don't know if it was TPUSA. In any event, it was a conservative guy interviewing young white students about whether or not there should be voter ID laws. And every one of these young, white, rich students said, oh, no, black people cannot possibly go and get IDs. No, it's too much. It's an unfair burden on them. It's racist. So we definitely don't want voter ID laws. Then the same guy went to black people and asked them, what do you think about voter ID laws? We think they're great. White students say that you're not capable of going out and getting an ID. What? No, they've told me to my face on camera that black people are not capable of going down and getting an ID. And black Americans look at him in shock and say, well, how am I going to get on an airplane? Black people don't fly, not according to rich white progressives. No. They are extremely delicate little creatures, and they have to be taken care of by the great white father. You see, the real racism on the left is virtually unbearable. The news media used to provide us with news. Now, I wasn't naive enough, and I don't think anybody was naive enough to think that any particular newspaper, back in the day when we had newspapers, was objective. But there was a time when New York City, for example, might have 15, 17, 18, 19 different newspapers, and a person who really wanted to get the truth would subscribe to 3 or 4 of them. He'd read the left-wing newspaper, he'd read the right-wing newspaper. He would get the truth one way or another even though the bias was built into the system because we're all humans. Now, the news media is nothing but a propaganda organ. In fact, the Ministry of Truth has now decided that we're going to have a government agency that's going to determine what's true and what's not, based on what they want as a policy outcome. Education system in the United States used to be the envy of the world. People used to come from all around the world to see what free education could do. We had a population that was completely educated, virtually completely literate, highest test scores on the planet. And then we got the Department of Education, and then the left arrived, and then the left took over. Now we have indoctrination centers, where the purpose of college is to go someplace where you can be protected from any new ideas. And as the budget for the Department of Education increases, our test scores continue to go down. Our test scores are now so bad that we're not going to have test scores anymore, you see? That's what the left does. These monsters come in and smash everything, and then they move on. Movies used to be about heroes. Now they're about anti-heroes. And the villains in the movie today are you. They're just part of the general sense of critical theory, not just critical race theory, these constant attacks on the center. From every side, attack the center, attack the middle, attack tradition, attack everything. Movies are now simply propaganda reels. And that's why nobody goes to the movies anymore. Remember the Academy Awards? Remember when people used to sit up and watch the Academy Awards? Remember when people would have like office betting pools on the Academy Awards? That hasn't happened for 10 or 15 years. And it's interesting, isn't it, that the only time the Academy Awards have been interesting in the last 2 decades was a time when physical violence erupted and the rules that keep society were shattered once again right in front of our eyes. And finally, it's hard to believe, but I was there, I saw it. Race relations are much, much, much worse. The country has become a much more angry, much more intolerant, much more vicious place than it used to be. And what do you say to all of this? If you put all of this on a table and you just look at it, what possible conclusions can you come to? They've already destroyed the courts, or doing their best to destroy the courts. They've destroyed the Senate and the House. The Senate used to be the House of the states. No, the progressives already took care of that. Now it's just the House of Lords, you see. There's no protection for the states anymore. Things like the filibuster, things like that. Harry Reid needs a vote, so we're going to throw that tradition out the window, just like the tradition of not leaking Supreme Court stories. That's going to go too. We'll destroy that. We'll destroy everything. We'll just go right down the list. We have a president who doesn't know what day of the week it is. We have a vice president who tries to explain to children what day of a week it is. And we are in extremely difficult shape. But my theory has been from the outset of this, but especially since the 2020 election, that despite the appalling catastrophe that the left has been for the country and the world, by the way, that when the left is in absolute power, then they have to come into contact with reality. And when that happens, everything they have falls apart. And everything is proceeding as I have foreseen. Because after this leak that Roe v. Wade was likely to be overturned, this, again, the third rail of left-wing politics, this is it. This is the hill they will fight and die on. Surely, when this news is leaked, Republicans are going to take a battering. That's why it was leaked. Well, not according to the latest poll. After the leak about Roe v. Wade being overturned, Republicans gained 4%. Why? Well, because we've had monsters on the loose in this country now for 40 years, but really roaming the streets in broad daylight for the last 4 or 5. And everywhere we look, we see what they do and how they act and the damage, just the trail of wreckage they leave. And I've been kind of selective about this particular word today because I don't generally think it's fair, and I still have an interest in being fair, to call your political opponents monsters. I'm not calling them monsters because they disagree with me. And I'm not even calling them monsters because of the damage that they've done. Because you could make the case, although certainly won't stand up, that they didn't really know what they're doing. No, I'm calling them monsters because now we're seeing what they're really, really made of. Really made of. Now, after the Supreme Court leak, we're seeing that this is a death cult, that the only definition of a woman, as far as the left is concerned, is someone who is not only willing to get an abortion, but who is not only enthusiastic about getting an abortion, but somebody who is, but a woman is a person who will fight to the death in order to have an abortion and to terminate her pregnancy, to terminate her unborn child. That's the definition of a woman today for the left. That's the definition. That's what they are. We find out in the news that the Satanists have claimed a religious exemption for abortion. This picture that we used during the thumbnail makes my skin crawl. It makes my skin crawl. And I suspect it does for you too. Well, Satanism is live and well in America, and what the Satanists are saying is we have a constitutionally protected First Amendment right to murder babies, and you can't take that away from us. Why even have Planned Parenthood clinics? Why not just throw them into the fire? That's what the Carthaginians did. That's what worship of Baal is all about. Why not just throw the children into the fire? That'll make Satan much happier, because it'll be much more painful, much more dramatic, much more awful, much more appalling, much more destructive, much more horrifying, much more monstrous. If you look at all of these things that I mentioned as a list and just presented it to any impartial alien that arrived on this planet and said, this is the result of this particular political philosophy, they would look at you and they would ask the same question I'm going to ask. They wouldn't look at you and say, why are there people like that? People like that have always been around. They'd look at you and they'd ask you, why did you allow this to get to this point? Are you insane?